Hello, this is Eric, and this is another phone video. And today we're going to be talking about Model View Controller and how it's used in the foam framework, or specifically the U2 package in the foam framework. So here I have the previous example from the video on building a foam project with just JavaScript. So we're not going to be using Java in this video. So this has our index file, a simple controller that just says hello foam, and this is what it looks like in the browser. In the U2 package, we have a few different classes that we can extend, which all extend from element. So one is controller, one is view, and another is element, which both of those extend from. And I'm going to talk about how these relate to model, view, and controller. And the concept of model actually won't come from either of these three. And models are not called model in foam because this is a model. Foam is a model-oriented framework, and that would overload the term a bit too much. So those are actually, that concept is called slots, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. We can't very well talk about Model View Controller without first talking about Model View Controller. And you'll see my face is brighter now because the screen's all white because we're in a diagram editor. So the concept of Model View Controller has been used in a lot of places. It powers the web, and it powers the folder windows that you use in most operating systems. And it's really simple. You have these three different types: view, a controller, and model. And in UML these are called boundary, controller, I think still, and entity. What a boundary is any interface either to a user or somewhere outside. So you could consider an API to be a sort of boundary, although in some cases you might consider it a controller. But this is what the in most cases, especially in the case of U2, this is what the user is going to be interacting with. The entity object, or the model, is the data that exists either in a database or in memory. So under the concept of Model View Controller, that's unspecified. So this is the data being worked on. And the view, you'll notice this arrow here, the view is able to take information from the model. So in this case I have user and a login screen. I know there's some websites that let you choose like a glyph that the website's going to show you if you type your username at the login screen to verify that the server is who you think it is. That's kind of old-fashioned now because we use HTTPS to solve that problem, but that's sort of an example that the view can read from the model. The controller, it's able to read from the model, make changes to the model, and incorporate some additional logic, some behavior. So maybe if you try to log in with a password, maybe the model doesn't actually contain a plain text password, which if we have some data representing a user, that would normally be the case. So the controller would know how to take your plain text password you enter here, put it through a hashing algorithm, and then compare it with the hash in the model. So that stuff belongs to the controller. The concept itself is very simple. You can also have controllers talk to other controllers. So we might actually consider our hashing algorithm to be a different, if I can type, a different controller. Controllers can interact with any of these things. Views can read from the model. And that's, I think, a pretty decent summary of Model View Controller. So now we can move on to how we use this concept in U2 in foam. In our foam example, let's make something that looks like this. So it's going to be an online store, or like a pseudo online store, and it's going to have a view of products, a view of a shopping cart, and a controller to manage these things. So when you're looking at all of the products in the store and you click on one, the shopping controller will choose what happens when you click on one. You might choose how many you want, and it'll put them in your, clicked the wrong thing, that's the view. It'll put them in your shopping cart, and that should update the cart view. And I wrote the arrows to represent how these things can communicate with each other. And what will be interesting in foam is this relationship between the controller and a view is more specifically composition. So we can say our controller has its own view attached to it, or it is a view, depending on what lens you're looking from, and that view aggregates these two views. And the shopping controller can manipulate the views, which is perfectly fine under the sort of terms of how model view controller works, and listen to events on these views, which is what we want. For our entities, we have our inventory. I'm calling it product DAO, so it's all of our products that are available, and the shopping cart, which could be a junction DAO associated with the user. I might just do this as an array to simplify the explanation, but we'll see what happens. I'm doing this a little bit ad lib. We already have a controller from our previous example, so I'm just going to rename the shopping controller. And whoops, that's still controller. This is shopping controller. Since we're not using the Java server, I'm just going to set up a DAO in here. So this will be our product DAO. So the whole store's inventory, just kind of offline on the client. A bit of an unrealistic scenario maybe, but good for demonstration. So this is going to be, we can make an MDAO of what? Of item? Shopping item? I call it product. So each product has a name and a description, and I'll add a few of those. I guess products also have a cost. That might be something we want to incorporate. We now have a DAO with some products in it. So this is sort of an unconventional, hacky way to get a list of products in here. I just put a constant on the product model called product. So normally these would be in a journal file, a .jrl file, and if we were building with the Java server, then we'd add a product DAO in services.jrl. But for this example, I just have some products here, and they're being constructed and put into this MDAO just in memory on the client. And that meant I need to add product and MDAO to requires, export product DAO, which we'll need for later, and also, very importantly, add product to pom.js. Now we want to show a list of products, and there's actually a demo in Foam that's pretty similar to what we want to do. So this is the heroes demo. It's a list of heroes, as the name suggests, and these heroes have their own little controllers. By little controller, I don't mean a Foam controller. I just mean the behavior of the action on the citation view, which does a DAO remove, and it imports the DAO, which is called DAO because it's the only DAO in this Foam example. And what we want from it is this view here. And this view is called Foam U2 DAO list. DAO list is actually, it extends element, although it has a property called data. So it behaves similar to a view, which you can specify a delegate view, which it's going to use multiple times for each row. In the heroes example, the citation view is used. That's what's displaying these little boxes here. I've added a view to the product DAO property, and for the row view, I'm using the citation view that exists in the Foam U2 package, and then I add the property itself here. And Foam will understand that what I really want to put here is the view for that property. So let's try that out. And oh, I forgot to rebuild. So once that's rebuilt, we'll see the default citation view has this hover effect, and it just shows the ID of the models, which in this case might not be what we want. So now I've added a product citation view, which looks like this, and has also been added to the pom.js file. There's a little bit of styling here. We got a class for the element itself that wraps product citation view, and there are no arguments in add class here. This is actually equivalent to just doing add class, this .my class. It's a shorthand. But for these two, there's no way around it. Name, it'll become com example product citation view name, which I'll show in the browser. And use the caret here to represent that. This actually might change in the future because caret itself has meaning in CSS, so that basically this example might be outdated at some point in time because of that. And here's what that looks like. So we have our products in this new citation view, and these are what those classes look like. What we want to do next is add products to a cart when we click on them. For that we need a cart, and we also need to be listening to click events on all of the products. Let's deal with handling the click event first, because we may actually need to change this view property and replace it with a view factory property. This is DAO list, so we can take a look at DAO list and see how we handle rows being clicked from here. There's the on click in this, it's called row factory, so this is where all the rows are being made. And if we click on the element, it will publish to a topic called row click, and that should be up here in the topics axiom. Topics will create some subjects that you can listen and publish to, or topics. One way that we could handle this is I could actually add a function here and create the view. So create foam2 DAO list, and then if we made the same topic, what was it called? Row click. We could set that equal to view.rowclick, something like that, and then subscribe to the topic here. Or probably better to just do row click sub. Put a function here, handle whenever the row is clicked, and use I think it's view.selection to get the actual object. But there is a simpler way to do this right now. It looks like the selection property starts off as undefined or null, and that means we can just listen for it to change to see when something's been clicked. We'll see if I'm right soon enough anyway. And because it is a property, we can't set the slot here, so we need to do a function anyway. I have my function here now that creates a view. One caveat about these to note is that this, so if I do console log, what is this? This is going to be the property itself. So an object instance of foam.core.property with the name product DAO. It's not going to be the shopping controller. If we want to access the shopping controller, the second argument of this function, which is a context, has a member called data, which is the instance of, in this case, shopping cart controller, but whichever model this property is on. So we bind to not this .product click, but x.data.product click, and product click is a listener. A listener is really similar to a method. We could actually use this as a method, but then we would have to add .bind x.data here. Otherwise, the correct value of this keyword inside this function would be lost. So it's easier to set it as a listener. And using a listener axiom carries some other advantages. We have properties like isFramed and isMerged, and if we set those, we can have, for example, listeners get called only on the next animation frame, or listeners which get called within a certain number of milliseconds get merged together, so we can sort of deduplicate certain events. Debounce is the word I was looking for. It's a term that comes from buttons on arcades and things like that. When you click it, it might send 2 interrupts, so you want to debounce that. So that's the same idea with isMerged and merge delay here. Then again, we're talking about model view controller in U2 and foam, so that's a bit of YouTube video scope creep there. It looks like the selection property, let's just appreciate how wrong I was here, undefined or null, and that means we can just listen for it to change to see when something's been clicked. That wouldn't have worked. It looks like the selection property for a few reasons. Well, if the user clicked the same thing twice, we wouldn't get an update from that property, and that wouldn't be correct. But I was also trying to get around creating this function for the view, and we still need to do that if we want to slot to the selection property anyway. So I just wanted to address that explicitly again to prevent any of the confusion it might have caused. That's just one of the consequences of ad-libbing these videos, and it also gives me a decent excuse to play around with the different things that OBS can do. And now he has it working. I can click these, I can click the same thing twice, and we can get an event. So now we just need to add them to a shopping cart, and for that we need a shopping cart. Typically we would have some kind of a junction DAO between users and products that they've put in their cart. However, this is just a DAO in memory on the client, so it's not like having a system-wide cart DAO. I might struggle to do this a little bit now because the cat has decided she wants to sit on my arm. I've now added cart DAO, and I've just added it to the view as well. Add this cart DAO, and added some headings. And this is, I'll just refresh this. This is what it looks like now, so I can click cheese grater, monkey wrench, they both get added. You'll notice if I do click the same thing twice, we don't actually get an item in there. The reason for that is we're just adding this object into the DAO, and it has the same ID. So each of the products has, I have it generating a random UUID. I don't think I actually showed this on the video, but I added this ID property because it won't, you can't have a DAO without any index, and ID is the default index. This sort of fits the real world scenario though, because we're going to want a cart item that keeps track of how many of a particular item user has. And this, if we were using a junction between user and product here, this would actually be the information in the junction. So what is the user's relationship with the product? It is that they have this many of the product in their cart, and that could be 0, in which case there probably just isn't a record there. So we'll actually use a reference property here. So we'll have a reference to a product. Because we don't have multiple users, we can actually just name this ID. Generally, we use a foam relationship axiom with 2 IDs, source ID and target ID. So our source ID might be the user's ID, and our target ID might be the product's ID. But in this situation, since we have one user, I'll just make product the ID, and maybe in a video later we'll fix that and use a foam relationship instead. Of course, we can't forget to put this in our pom.js file. I'm going to take a shortcut of using the product citation view also for cart items. So I'm going to add a property called isCart, which is going to be an expression on the data coming into this view, and it's just going to check if the data is an instance of cart item. Of course, we'll have to require that as well. This is going to be a bit of work actually. Now we need to find a cart item if it exists with that ID, and then increment the count if it exists. Otherwise, we're going to create a new one. So, because this is a listener and nothing it tends to wait for, I can make this async and use a wait here. So we'll wait until we find an item, and then we'll, if there's not an item, we'll put a new cart item. Actually, if we use let instead of const here, then we can just create the new one here. Default count set to 1. And then we just do the put into cart DAO. I keep accidentally writing card. I wonder why. Because I made this listener asynchronous, it might be tempting to think, oh, it should resolve when anything else has resolved. But I have asked about this, and listeners are not asynchronous in that way. That's not part of the interface. Nothing will wait for a listener to resolve that way. And if it happens that I'm wrong about that and that changes, I'll make a follow-up video. Gotta require cart item. Is it in pom.js? Yes. cls.split is not function. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening yet. Unrelated, I also forgot to increment the count of the item when there already is one present. It says enable class here, so that's probably related to that shortcut I tried to take in product citation view over here. Yeah, I never actually specified the class. Is it the first argument or the second argument? Element.js is a good place to look for that kind of stuff. I see class and then enabled. So I actually have these arguments the wrong way around. This goes at the end. Let's make the count blue. Blue is a friendly color. Enable class is not actually what I wanted here anyway. I want show. This dot is cart. And this is just going to be add class, which is, I assume, why those arguments were put in this order, so it's easy to fix this mistake that I just made. My view is working, but it's coming up empty. I know why that's happening though. There are two reasons. Part of it, the count isn't showing because I wrote cost instead of count. But the other part of it is that name and cost, see that count's working, are not properties of cart item. So I could use some asynchronous behavior to fetch the product from the DAO and populate those properties, which I will save for another video. In this video, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to learn about copy from. Copy from will let us take properties from another object that have the same names and should have the same classes. So this is usually better if you're extending the thing that you're copying from, or vice versa maybe. We're going to copy from this object. That should solve everything, I think. Frying pan, we see all the properties. Now we can get 2 frying pans, a couple of these wrenches, and a cheese grater. The next thing to do is add some actions. So we may want to add actions in each of the items to remove them from the cart, and we might want to add some actions to the shopping controller itself. For example, maybe you'd like to clear all of the items in your cart and start fresh. However, this video is getting a bit lengthy, so I think I'm going to make a part 2, and I'll go over those things then. So see you in however long it takes to make the second part of this video.